In this video, we're going to show you how to use Rollbar's React Native SDK. So we're going to make a few assumptions, namely that you've already used Rollbar, you know how to log in, resolve items, create projects, etc. If you need more information about some of those more rudimentary operations, go out to our YouTube channel or our website. Let's go and jump in immediately, and we're going to create a React SDK project. You can call the project whatever you want, doesn't really matter. It's rather arbitrary. The next thing we need to do is we need to pick the React Native SDK. But as you can see here, we support a ton of different mobile SDKs. Okay. We also have a new Apple SDK that's in beta currently as well that will be replacing Objective-C and Swift over time. So if we go ahead and click Continue, now we can see at this point, before we can generate any data, we need to instrument our application. So in my example, I used Expo to build my React Native application, but you don't necessarily have to do that. Expo is a really great way to build applications because it'll build them and it's really independent of the operating system. And then when you build the application, if it's going to run on an emulator or a simulator, it will create the objects in the Appium tree for you automatically. So it's a great way to do it. But don't worry, if you're not using Expo to create React Native apps, you can still leverage the Rollbar SDK. Okay. So I did it this way. If you're using Yarn, here's the example. Here's the CocoaPods example. And if we scroll down here, what we need to do now is we need to go ahead and put the Rollbar token in our app.js file. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll save this. And if we go down here, you can see this is a pretty basic configuration. So if we go to my configuration, it's a little bit different. I'm passing in some additional features. So I'm passing in an environment. So you can monitor multiple environments with Rollbar. So you can monitor production, pre-production, UAT, staging, integration, whatever environment you want. And as a best practice, we do recommend that you monitor multiple environments with Rollbar. I'm also capturing the device information. The other critical thing in here is the payload. So you see here that I'm adding a person object because I'm enabling people tracking. And all of what I'm showing you here, we're going to show you in the tool and the benefits of doing this. So if you enable people tracking, you can correlate users of your applications to actual errors. Another thing that we've added in here is we're passing in a server object. So we can see the host. This is where the application is actually hosted. We can see the AWS region. So if there is an error and I need to get the DevOps team involved, I can tell them the exact host they need to go investigate if there was a legitimate infrastructure type of problem. Okay. Another thing we're passing in is a custom field in the payload. So we're passing in a transaction ID. You could pass in whatever you want. But in this example, let's say you have an e-commerce application and you want to be able to pass in transaction IDs because later I'm going to show you how you can use Rollbar SQL to query occurrences based on specific data that you send in the payload. The other use case for this would be you can also use our custom fingerprints. You can create additional grouping rules based on custom data that you send in the tool. So it's a really powerful feature. And last but not least, the code version. So we can see here, if you're not passing in a code version, you can't leverage the Rollbar versions SDK. And we'll get into what that means here in just a minute. So now we jump over here, and as you can see here, I have the local Expo server running. I'm actually going to take a picture of this barcode. And what it's going to do, it's actually going to install the app, start it. That's going to generate a few errors on my actual physical device. I could also use this to spin up an emulator or a simulator and run my application that way. But sometimes that takes a little longer to run, so I went this approach. And we can see here that the application actually generated some errors. So if we go back over here and we go to items and we're going to go back and look at our particular project, we can see that we've generated some errors. So let's do that. Click on our project. And we can see here we've generated a few errors, okay? So this is great. We've actually got some data in the tool now with this React Native app. So if we scroll down here, the first thing I want to point out, and we have support telemetry with some of our other SDKs, namely JavaScript, but you can see exactly what the user was doing right up to the point where the error was generated. So it's a really great way to give a developer more insight into what the user was doing before the error occurred. Notice here we click on occurrences. This is the Rollbar's grouping engine. We're not going to go into a lot of details about how that works, but I'm sure you're familiar with that at this point. I wanted to point out some additional fields that we're passing in the Rollbar payload. We're passing in the server host. Here's our host where the application is located, the code version which we talked about, and the custom transaction ID. So down here at the bottom, I'm going to click on Explore RQL Query, and we can see here that these are all the different occurrences. Okay, but what I could do is I could say I'm only interested in occurrences that have a custom transaction ID in it. So, if I had an e-commerce application and I'm tracking transaction IDs, maybe certain transaction IDs or ones that start with a certain number, it's very flexible to whatever you want, but you could query for specific data based on that, based on data that you've customized and sent into the Rollbar payload. Another thing wanted to touch on was this concept of versions. So we talked a little about this before, but if we go in here to versions, we can see we just started this application, so this is a brand new project, but over time, once you have a lot of different code versions and builds, you're going to be able to see multiple different errors. And what the versions API will allow you to do is triage and quickly determine, did this item occur in a previous version of the product? Okay, so we can see here that these errors never occurred in a previous version of the code. So this is really helpful. Teams will use this to triage, to roll back deployments, to stop deployments, to quickly fix these issues and then redeploy the product. Also, if they're deploying features behind a feature flag, we can send a kill switch to turn that flag off as well. So if there were any reactivated items, we'd see those here. Of course, those would be items that we had previously resolved in an earlier version of Rollbar. If they've been reactivated, it indicates whatever code change we made didn't actually fix the problem. The last thing I wanted to briefly touch on was people tracking. So if we click on our particular project, and we can see what's happening with people tracking. But this gives us, like I was saying, we can see here that we've got a couple of different people here. So this could be a user ID. You could also pass in an email address, a username. In my example, I'm doing a user ID, but it could be whatever you want. And here we can see this user is associated with these particular errors in the application. So again, from a triaging standpoint, we want to give you the insight and the context so you can determine which errors you want to fix the fastest that really need to be fixed immediately. So hopefully this gave you a brief overview of how to use the React Rollbar native SDK. Go out to the website or check our YouTube channel for more information.